Hi there. If you're jumping on to the Zoom, thanks so much for joining. You're tuning into the Energy and Weatherization for Immigrant and Resettlement Communities, hosted by Button Up Vermont for this Weatherization Wednesday series. We're just getting started, so I'm going to be putting us live on Facebook. And if you can see us, or if you see the presentation with the list of participants, popping up with even more people, and then the partners on our button up slide, you're in the right place. So I'm going to kick it off by moving us over to Facebook Live. And what you should be seeing still is the presentation with the list of our weatherization agencies. So for Button Up Vermont, we're always excited to highlight the fact that we are a partner-driven organization, campaign, and what's extremely exciting about today is I don't even get to be the moderator because we have been able to get a fabulous partner to be our moderator for today's discussion. So as I start to get the Facebook Live going, you can continue to check out the slide of our weatherization agency partners. Some of our other partners include our great nonprofits, all listed here, and our utility partners. So as I start to end this presentation, which lists all of our partners, I am thrilled to pass the mic over to Jennifer Green from the Burlington Electric Department, and she will be facilitating this informal conversation, this discussion on the topic today. And I'll just point out that if you're watching on Zoom, what you can do is put a question in the chat or in the Q&A section. And if you're watching on Facebook Live, you can put a question in the chat on Facebook Live, and we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. So with that, I'm gonna stop sharing and pass it on over to Jen.
Great, I'm muting myself. Thanks so much, Becca. You know, BED really appreciates being part of the Button Up team. We really value that partnership, and we're especially excited to have been invited today to participate. So glad that I get to take the reins as moderator. I hope that makes your afternoon a little simpler. Thanks for the opportunity. So as Becca mentioned, my name is Jennifer Green. I am the Director of Sustainability and Workforce Development at the Burlington Electric Department. And today I'm here with two of my dear colleagues, Tiana Smith. Tiana is the Director of Climate Strategy for Vermont Gas Systems, and Anu Makinde, who was our Sustainability Fellow over the summer. So Tiana and Anu, thank you so much for sharing your lunchtime with us. Really appreciate you being here.
Yes, thanks for having us.
Yes, thanks.
Well, I do want to hear from both of you, maybe first a little bit about Tiana, starting with you, your job and what it entails, and then Anu, we'll transition to you. We want to talk to you a little bit about the fellowship, and then we'll dig a little deeper as a team as to why we thought the fellowship was so important and some of the key findings of your work. Tiana, let me kick it to you though first, if you can introduce yourself and tell us what you do at VGS.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much. So I have the awesome job of being able to help with our efforts around climate. So last year, at the end of last year, we launched our climate plan and a commitment to climate, and that is to be net zero for our greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, with a shorter term milestone goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 30% by 2030. And so energy efficiency is a really big piece of this. You know, understanding our customers is a big piece of this, and obviously there's a huge intersection between equity and the climate and energy and health. And so yes, we were really excited to partake in this effort with you all at Burlington Electric, and with Anu and her great work over the summer.
Well, thanks, Tiana. That's great. It really sets the stage for why we're here. Before we really dive deep into conversation, Anu, I do want to give you a chance to introduce yourself. Tell us sort of where you are academically. We know that you are a student and were with us as a student over the summer.
Yeah, so right now I'm in my 4th year at the University of Ottawa. Last year I was at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. I'm studying sociology, and I think that it really connects with sustainability, mainly of how people in positions of power are ready to help the climate emergency and how people access sustainability efforts like energy efficiency, which is what we'll be talking about today.
Great, so looking forward to that. Tiana, curious, I think you and I sort of got together a year ago and we talked about this program offered through the University of New Hampshire. It's a fellowship program. You apply, you pony in a little money. UNH, their sustainability program, puts in some money and they put out a job description on your behalf. You get to work with them while they sort of recruit possible candidates. So you and I floated this idea quite a while ago. I'm curious what sort of encouraged you to participate with BED in not only devising this program, or excuse me, the work for Anu this summer, but ultimately sort of why we honed in on equity as a theme that we wanted to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I would say is that VGS really started ramping up our efforts around diversity, equity, and inclusion early last year. And we really started to understand that there was tremendous intersectionality between energy and equity. And then secondarily, health and the climate. I think we've seen that play out this year with obviously the pandemic and things that are going on at the national level around social justice. And so, two of VGS's values are climate and customers. And we know and we see that climate change really affects communities of color at an alarmingly high rate. And there's economic implications to that, as well as health implications. We saw Efficiency Vermont put out a really tremendous study about energy burden. Energy burden tends to be higher in communities of color, and VGS really strives to serve all of its customers equitably. We want to be able to, we understand that access is a tremendous part of serving our customers and making sure that they have access to sort of our suite of offerings, energy efficiency, weatherization, and things like that being a part of that. And so by working with you and asking Anu to help, it really presented the perfect opportunity for us to have someone really knowledgeable in that area focus in this and help us understand the obstacles, perhaps where there's communication breakdowns, so that we really can focus on making access to this assistance more equitable.
Yeah, thanks, Tiana. And Anu, sort of kicking it to you, you could have applied for any number of fellowships this summer, but you chose to work with Burlington. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about your family history, sort of what made this particularly relevant and personal to you.
Yeah. So even though I'm a sociology major and I'm really interested on things in the larger level and like macro things, I thought it was really interesting to be in a local community, and the way that the project was emphasized was a lot of community-based work. My background, both of my parents are immigrants from Nigeria, and then I was born in the States, but we moved to Canada. So growing up in a first-generation household, I was always seeing the differences between my Nigerian culture and the things that I saw in American or Canadian culture. And I thought that this program, which was specifically working with immigrant and refugee communities, was perfect for that, because it really blended some of my expertise, but also focused on how people who are less advantaged have access to things like energy efficiency. Sustainability has always been of interest to me, but I never really saw a way for myself to be in it, maybe because we see the climate rallies of the past few years, it's very whitewashed. But I think this project really gave me the chance to see that my identity can intersect with the work that I'm doing and help people and understand how a certain population accesses energy.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anu. Having someone with lived experience and applying it to Burlington and looking through that lens, I think really made your research important. So I dare say one of the key takeaways that you've left BED and VGS with is the importance of working with stakeholders who are working with newcomer, new American populations. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? For those of us that are working for institutions that want to collaborate with new Americans, but may lack the ability or resources to do that, we think that one way to move ahead is to identify sort of the AALVs, i.e. the Association of Africans Living in Vermont, in your community, so that you can better loop into what's happening on at the ground. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of those stakeholder groups that you identified and why you think it's important to be working with them?
Yeah, for sure. I'll talk first. You talked about the AALV, the Association of Africans Living in Vermont. We are able to talk to CVOEO, the Champlain Valley of Economic Opportunity. We're able to talk to the USCRI, which is the Refugee Resettlement, the federal government entity in Vermont. And we're able to see, well, I was able to see through connecting with all these people that they do a lot of work grounded in advocacy and supplying resources to people. And at first, I didn't think that their work would be important to energy efficiency or access to equity. But then I realized that what they're able to provide BED and VGS with is a different point of view, because every day that they're going to work with these people and they know more about these people. And it can be hard when you're trying to get to learn more about a new community. They're kind of hesitant to trust authority. So being able to make a connection and make a foundation for work that isn't going to just be one project, but something that's going to span the lifetime. And even with how new people are coming into this community continually, you want to be able to keep on reaching out to them. So that's why I think it's important to get in contact with community organizations.
Yeah, thanks, Anu. I guess based on that, Tiana, I'm curious sort of what your takeaway is from those comments and how that applies to VGS in your work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that Anu described it beautifully. It's really about relationships. And I think that what we understood through her work is that there are a tremendous amount of agencies that are doing this work and having these touches in these communities. There's often overlap, and there's often, you may not realize that services that are being provided actually apply to energy, because it seems, it's not sort of overtly saying it's about energy efficiency, but it does tie back to it. So my takeaway is that not only do we need to develop those relationships with the immigrant and resettlement communities, and Anu brought this up, but really realizing that a lot of children and going out into the schools, they can bring the messages back home to their families because they act as the liaison in that way. But for us to continue developing the relationship as utilities and as energy efficiency utilities with those agencies, that there's a lot that we can be doing to streamline our messaging and our programming and our offerings, so that we ensure that we're not making things more confusing to people trying to access them, and really presenting a united front in offering this access.
Yeah, thanks, Tiana. And before we kicked off, we reviewed some of the data out of Burlington to sort of grease our skids, and we were reminded, and of course, like VGS, BED is really customer focused. We really love our customers, we care about our customers, and we really honor being trusted advisors. So if you consider that 34% of Burlington School District students are students of color, you are seeing sort of the future, and you're seeing who our customer base will grow into be. And if we're not thinking proactively now about how to best engage, if we're not sort of developing our cultural competency, if we're not developing relationships, as you say, Tiana, with organizations that are connected with our new American population now, we're gonna find ourselves running catch up later. So we talked about that, and we also talked about the fact that 14% of Burlingtonians speak a language other than English at home. So, it's just important background information to remember. Anu, oh, go ahead, Tiana. You're going to
Well,
say
no,
something.
I was just going to say, I think that that's so important. And when we think about how all of our customers access, even when they come into our buildings or when they jump onto our websites, and thinking about it from that lens, you know, often the people that are creating the programming or developing, you know, the way that the website might look aren't necessarily thinking about that lens. But this certainly opened our eyes to the need to do that. Burlington's a big part of our service territory at VGS, and you know, understanding that that impact is really important.
Yeah, thanks, Tiana, for those words. Anu, curious, you told us a little bit about sort of takeaways, including the importance of working with service organizations that are working with new Americans. What else did you learn from your Burlington experience? And of course, that can be anything related to even how the process worked for you, given the fact that you could not be in Burlington as we had originally hoped and planned. So sort of an open question, curious to hear your reflections.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I was most excited about was being able to be in person and meet with these people and learn their stories. So not being able to do that was a little bit frustrating for me. But because of the work that you guys do, which you already knew was kind of grounded in equity, you had a great list of contacts that I could start with. And then from there, I just built with people who I thought they should have me reach out to. So as Tiana was saying, building relationships was really important, but also approaching it with a bit of respect, realizing that I'm an outsider. I'm not from Burlington. Even though I am a first generation Canadian American, I don't have the experience of living in Burlington. So being really respectful in those conversations and realizing where I need to step back and realizing where I can amplify their voices and how I can transfer that into the end of my work and make sure that these relationships continue and people continue to feel respected and heard and seen.
It's really, it's a beautiful sentiment, Anu. And it reminds me, you know, you did have the opportunity to talk to one customer. And I think it became pretty clear that this woman had some really telling information to share based on her lived experience in Vermont and what it's like being a single mom and a woman who was not born in the United States. You talked about the lived experience, and we talked about sort of the value of that lived experience. And I think in the end, we provided financial compensation for her time. And I'd like to hear both from Tiana and Anu about sort of this theory that, you know, it's easy for us to ask people for their insight or information or to share their history. But if we're really asking people to really share so that we can learn and grow our programs and have them reflect our customer base, then sometimes, you know, providing people, spending a little money to compensate people for that lived experience is important. I don't know if you want to reflect on that.
Yeah, I would say that was a really growing sentiment with all the community groups I spoke to. A lot of them, when I introduced this problem with them, they were aware that it happened and that they were paying a lot for bills and that sometimes it was hard to keep up, but they weren't aware that people were actively working to reduce this burden. So they wanted to be supported with time and money. I think a lot of the time people expect community groups or advocacy groups to do all the work. Like you give them the problem and just because that's their job, then it's up to them to solve it. But I think what they wanted to see that people were actively making an effort with time and with money to help them.
And I'll just add that I think that that initial investment in really valuing the information and the feedback pays dividends, you know, many times over in the future as well. And so very much well worth the investment to pay people for their time. And they're also providing a tremendous value and sharing their firsthand lived experience. And in some ways you can't really put a price tag on that. So I think that that's something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it just sort of reiterates Anu's use of the word respect, because what the stories that people have to share in their lived experiences is so valuable. We definitely want to demonstrate respect, and sometimes that is compensation for their time. So with so many questions, I guess, Anu, I'd really like to hear, sort of, now that you've had experience in Burlington, you've had experience reaching and contacting not only service providers, but a few of the folks that are our customers. Is there any other takeaway that you want to leave us with, particularly those of us that are thinking about designing programs or policies to reflect our changing demographics?
Yeah, I would say kind of like some concrete steps based on the things that I've had to say. You can reflect how much respect, time, and money with the liaison model, which is a thing that a lot of people do in Burlington, having members of the community be able to work within the customer base and then take that information back to the organization. And also, if you are intending to create programs, really putting it in the hands of the community and trusting them to be able to do what's right because they know what they need. But also realizing that it's going to take time because it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. Every community has different needs. So just being patient, being open-minded, because it can take a lot of time to understand someone's experience, and just saying for you to understand is easier said than done. So being open-minded is another thing I would recommend.
Thank you. Tiana, don't know if you want to add to that, or I can segue to another question.
Well, what I'd like to say is that I am grateful that we got this experience, because seeing Anu's presentation at the end, as well as some of the other fellows, I was just very hopeful for our future. And I was very hopeful for what I think, this different perspective is bringing to these conversations, and that we learned a tremendous amount. And I think that we will be approaching our programming. We already have a lot on the table in terms of energy efficiency and how we incentivize, and how we partake in things like the Button Up campaign. And we've partnered with Burlington Electric over the years on like the Champ Challenge and things like that. And so we know that the programming's there. We just haven't necessarily built the programming, making sure that there's access for all. So this will definitely be a lens that we'll be looking through in the future, is making sure that however we continue to partner in the future or deliver on these programs, which are available to all of our customers, we're doing so from that perspective.
Thanks so much, Tiana. We do have a question in the chat. We've been through this a little bit, but I am curious, Anu and Tiana, if there are any takeaways or surprises that were revealed to you or uncovered, particularly Anu, maybe when you talked to the customer base. You had mentioned that there was a hesitation to talk with sort of quote unquote a government official, and that there's sometimes a power structure play there that we have to be sensitive of. You talked a little bit about sort of energy equity and this idea that oftentimes our new American communities members are experiencing sort of greater energy poverty than maybe the average customer. Is there anything else that sort of crystallized for you that you think it's important to share?
Yeah, I think it was interesting for me to see how many people did or didn't relate with my story. I think being a first-generation child of immigrants, I would sometimes lead with that to make people feel safe and say, I understand where you're coming from. I lived through that experience. I know what your children may be feeling. But sometimes that wasn't always received well. And I don't think it was in a bad way. I think it was just that I was an outsider to Burlington and I may not know exactly what they were going through. So that situation and those situations really emphasized for me how important it is to approach it with respect, and also not to be too upset at people not relating to me, because everyone's open to their own opinion.
Right, and just because you may look like the woman that you spoke with doesn't mean that your stories are the same or that she can
Exactly.
relate to your family's history. That's a really excellent point, and it's just a reminder that there's so many intricacies in this work, and we can't come up with a cookie cutter approach. I really like this idea, though, Anu, that you talked about just a few minutes ago, this liaison model, which I think you studied. You found a nonprofit in Canada that I think is applying this approach. So instead of me, Anu, serving as the liaison, because indeed you are an outsider, maybe it's identifying a Burlingtonian, one of our own customers, someone who's sort of a mover and shaker, connector in their own community that can in turn sort of serve as a connection to VGS and BED. We have another question in the chat, which I'm going to read off to you. This is really for both of you. I'm curious about some of the barriers that we're finding around weatherization. In Burlington, I can say, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Tiana, but of course we have a very high rental rate. And so when you're not a property owner, this gets really challenging. Can you respond to that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is very true. So oftentimes, you know, the landlords aren't paying the utility bills, so don't have a lot of motivation around making the upgrades. And so we have in the past and are continuing in the future. We partnered with you all on the Green Stimulus package for weatherization, and we have increased our incentives for landlords, for tenants who pay the utility bill, to reflect higher incentive levels, because that seems to make them, the landlords move. They sort of get the value on that. So we moved our incentives from 50%, where we pay half of the project, up to 75%. And so really a tremendous motivation there for landlords to move forward with that. Some of the other barriers are, you know, I think this is a challenge with weatherization probably throughout the state and outside of VGS's service territory as well, as these are big ticket items. So when someone is deciding to approach a weatherization project, this isn't, you know, sort of patching the furnace up and putting some weather stripping around. You know, oftentimes it can be several $1,000s. And so again, how do we structure our programs in such a way that people don't have to sort of do this all or nothing approach? Maybe they get more access to financing, you know, looking in the future to whether or not we might be able to associate this with utility bills. How do we make it a little more palatable to swallow those kind of big dollars that you need to get the true value out of the full weatherization.
Yeah, and I realize, of course, these are works in progress. Like what both of us, both VGS, BED, we've been talking a lot about the split incentive challenge. And I think now, thanks in part to Anu's work, we're sort of expanding our lens on how we need to look at this, particularly, again, given Burlington's data. 60% are renters, 34% students of color in the school district, 14% speaking a language other than English at home, and then almost 25% of Burlingtonians living in poverty. And we know that race is an indicator of how a human being fares. So we do, you know, at BED, we're really starting to ask ourselves questions around race and thinking about how tools that help us ask questions, as in who's benefiting, who's not benefiting, and how can we advance racial equity and social justice through our work. Because we're also learning that government originally had a role to play in inequities, and now it's really up to sort of local government partners and businesses to help tackle some of the inequities that are in place. And certainly that's something we're really committed to at BED, because we know that if we can assist, say, a new American who's experiencing challenges, any program or policy we can put in place that helps that demographic will help sort of the white person of low income as well. The three of us have talked about this idea of targeted universalism, and this idea of figuring out and helping to working with community members who experience the most sort of inequity and the most challenge. If we can tackle that, then everybody else will benefit. So I've really been thinking a lot about this idea of targeted universalism and how it can and might further apply to our work. Now, Tiana, I know you've got sort of an equity group that is meeting at VGS. Can you talk a little bit about your role, mission, and mandate?
Absolutely. So yes, we do have an equity group that started. It's a team that started of volunteers across VGS last year, meeting and really trying to unpack some of these issues. Obviously, we have a focus this year on race, and we issued a public statement and a list of commitments to hold ourselves accountable to understanding this issue and really improving the experience, not just of our employees, but of our entire customer base. And so the team meets regularly, monthly, and we kind of have a work plan in place where we, again, are thinking about our programming, how we talk about our programs, how people experience VGS, and then other things we can do to encourage that, obviously within our workforce as well.
Thanks, Tiana. It's really exciting to hear about your work and how VGS is taking the lead in this space. I know we're at about a half an hour, and so I think it's about time to wrap it up. Just a couple of quick comments. Tiana, folks are interested in knowing how a tenant can get involved in weatherization, and I think my response would be to go to the website. Both BED and VGS work together on what's referred to as the CHAMP Challenge for information and next steps.
Yes. So if you visit vgsvt.com, that's our website, and you can navigate from there or type into the search engine. I can provide a link here as well. You just call us up directly, and we can start out by understanding what your usage looks like and the type of energy audit that we can start, and that will help identify really what the path is towards weatherization, and then that plugs our customers into our programs and our incentives.
Great, thanks, Tiana. And although I was sort of getting into that place where we're wrapping it up, we do have an important question from a participant that I want to share with you, Anu. We're curious, this particular person, about the best venues in order to connect with folks. And if, say, in the time of COVID, Zoom seems to be a tool that is preferable for the New American community, and if so, how? And if not, sort of what other techniques you might recommend for folks that want to reach out?
Yeah, so I think right off the bat, I've learned that Zoom may not have been the best because internet access is connected to privilege. And when we're dealing with people who are new to a community or new to a country, they may not have internet access. Even the woman who Jen was talking about earlier, who I spoke to, she had to go to someone else's home to use a computer, and we had a socially distanced meeting that way. But I was able to talk to community groups through Zoom, but that's because their work depends on that. But if I wanted, or if you wanted to talk to people specifically, you would most likely, I couldn't say for sure because it depends on the community. But I think also blending ideas that they already do, maybe going into their meetings, seeing what type of meetings they do, how they gather, and asking to be involved in that, and listening to their stories, sharing your expertise would be a great way to start.
Thank you, Anu. That's really good advice. And you're reminding me of a circumstance at BED. It became pretty apparent to us that there were folks that had trouble interpreting their bills, and they had some pretty, they were concerned and they didn't know where to go or how to ask. And I think sometimes it was a constraint to have people come down to the Pine Street office, 585 Pine. So we have a lovely person who works in the Energy Services Department who took this theory that go to where people are. So Brian set up shop in the family room, which is, most folks know, is in the Old North End Community Center, with no big agenda other than to be there where people gather. So he made himself available to answer questions about their energy bills or anything else that might come up related to energy and how you could reduce energy load. And so Anu, I think one of the things that you have reminded us through your research is the importance, say, if Zoom is not the best technique, sort of what else is out there? And in the time of sort of pre-COVID, it's actually sort of going to where the people are. So on that note, let's hope that can all be possible to all of us in the fairly near term. So Becca, I see that you're back on the line. I want to thank you, and I want to really heartfelt thanks to Anu Makinde, who spent time with us this summer and really helped us unpack and is giving us the space to further explore how race and inequity and how communication and our commitment to the new Americans and our first generation community members has to be paramount. So I want to thank you so much, Anu, for all your work.
Thank you so much.
Our pleasure. I hope we can do it again, Anu. And I do want to say we are going to be back at Better Buildings by Design conference. I think this is sort of a precursor to what lays ahead. And of course, I have to thank my friend and colleague, Tiana, because if Tiana and I were not partners in crime on this project together, it wouldn't have been half as enlightening and certainly not half as fun. So thanks to both of you. And Becca, I kick it back to you.
Wow. Well, thank you, all three of you. This was such a good discussion, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your midday on a Wednesday to give some information to our button-up communities. And we did see a question in there. If you're hoping to get the recording, we will be having the recording emailed out. We've had questions before about closed caption, and we are putting videos on YouTube as well to have that function available. So again, I would just reiterate all the thank yous. And if you want more information about this, look out for an email if you registered for Zoom. And if you're on Facebook, feel free to send a message or email us. We've also got some information in the chat. So thanks, everybody, and happy Wednesday. Bye.
Thank you.